Hello and welcome back for another week. I am so excited. Teela Tomassetti is a registered provisional psychologist and doctoral student in Alberta, Canada. She has been working in the trauma field for almost 2 decades, supporting those in domestic violence, sexual assault, childhood sexual abuse, and tragic losses. After her best friend went through birth trauma 5 years ago, Teela decided to dedicate her doctorate to shedding more light on this area. Little did she know she would encounter her own birth trauma just a year and a half ago by way of midwifery violence and an excessive postpartum hemorrhage that almost took her life. Since then, Teela has become passionate about the world of birth trauma, and she began fast-growing Instagram account The Tea on Birth Trauma as a way to break the silence, shed light, and offer a space to speak to an issue that, according to research, impacts 1 in 3 women's experiences. Everyone, please welcome Teela. Hello.
Hi, Meg. Thanks so much for having me.
It is my absolute pleasure. I always like to start out by asking people how we know each other. I keep saying this and I never do anything about it. I need to get a new intro because most people it's because I've DM'd them. So I have been following you for a while on your Instagram, as I mentioned in your intro, and you were gracious enough to come on and say hi.
Yeah, I know I'm really looking forward to being here. And I'm excited to talk about the things like we were saying right before we hit record, is that it's an interesting word to say, like excited to talk about birth trauma. But
Yes.
there's so much value to this conversation. So I'm looking forward to it.
It is, if you don't mind a quick tangent, I actually just rebranded my private practice to Amplify Wellness Mental Health because I'm so passionate about amplifying mental health and getting the word out and decreasing the stigma and normalizing people's feelings. And it's just so important. And yeah, some of these are really tough topics. And also, it does bring us so much joy to be able to talk about the things we're passionate about.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. So tell me how you decided to get into psychology.
Oh boy. Okay. So this started originally, I was actually going to be a lawyer. That's like
Hey.
a interesting little tidbit about me. I grew up thinking that that's what I wanted to do because I've always been passionate about wanting to support victims of crime.
Mhm.
And so I actually grew up in a home, and not to get into too many details, but I have significant complex PTSD myself with my own childhood. So I
Mhm.
grew up in a home where there was domestic violence. My mom almost lost her life to the hands of my father. There was addiction that he was struggling with. I've actually been parentless since I was 25 years old. So I've
Mhm.
dealt with a lot of trauma and grief and loss. And so from a young age, I just became passionate about supporting other people. And initially, I had wanted to take that into law. And then I was, I was set into being a lawyer, like was headed into law school. I passed my LSAT and was like, I don't like lawyers. I don't think I want to do this.
How about that?
And yeah, I'll actually never forget the class that ended up deciding that for me. And I just realized that victims did not have a voice within our legal systems. It doesn't exist. And so I thought to myself, well, I can do a lot better work outside of the court systems. And so
Mhm.
that's kind of where I decided to pursue being a psychologist, is wanting to help people through trauma is what I
Mhm.
get to. Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah. And I saw it obviously in your bio that I had read talking about your friend's birth trauma, your own birth trauma that really helped guide you into the role that you're in now.
Yeah. So yeah, around 5 years ago, my best friend Christina, she had just given birth to her daughter, and I was sitting across from her. Came to meet Lucy and see how she was doing. And Christina just broke down crying in front of me, and could barely find her words, and then described her birth to me. And I just sat there stunned. I wasn't a mom myself at that time, and I didn't know that those kinds of things took place during birth. And so we
Right.
got to talking about it more, and she said, like, no one talks about this, but it happens a lot. And so I started to look into this and realize that that was the case, that all of these experiences were taking place, but nobody felt like they had the space in the room to really speak to it. And so I promised her at that time, I was actually just finishing my master's then, and said, you know what, the day that I decide to do my doctorate, which I knew I would do, I'm going to dedicate it to you. I want to figure out why people aren't talking about birth trauma and just create more resources and research in that area. So
Mhm.
that's how that initially began. Yeah.
Amazing. Amazing. And what a powerful moment between you and your friend to be able to say like, nope, we're gonna do this. We're gonna
Yeah.
start talking about it. Yeah. That's really great. Cause that I think is the biggest thing for a lot of people, is that isolation that comes from things that happen. It happens. The moment is stressful enough, and then to carry it, to feel like you have to stay silent because people won't understand, or something's
Mhm.
wrong with you, you've done something, whatever it might be, many reasons why we isolate, and to be able to say, no, you're not alone.
Yeah, gain I think a big thing that people take away from those experiences that creates that sense of isolation is the shame and guilt
Mm.
around it. Because if we don't have anything but positive things to say about our birth, well, then we shouldn't speak to it. That's kind of the energy
Uh-huh.
that society gives us around that, right? Around gratitude and just that toxic positivity feel. And so,
Yep.
yeah, let's break that isolation. Let's talk about it. And like, therefore, that shame and guilt is really going to start to dissipate.
Well, I know that's a big thing that I see a lot of people struggling with. I've struggled with myself. It's difficult because obviously in my job, but also personally, people with pregnancy, fertility issues, where it's like, well, at least you have a baby. At least, how dare you? I was in the hospital, and I really obviously was exhausted, but I don't remember complaining. I just remembered recounting the long labor and ending up having to have a C-section that was not the plan. And I really don't remember the posts being terribly anything but just matter of fact, and grateful that my son was there, and somebody actually posted on it, well, at least you get to take your baby home with you from the hospital. And I thought, first of all, unfriended that person. That energy.
Step number
Um,
one.
yeah. And also too, I was like, that's a really interesting that somebody felt empowered to have the right to say something like that to an exhausted, literally brand new mother. And again, not to defend myself, but I really don't remember it being that
Yeah.
complaining.
Oh,
So
and
yeah,
even if it was, Meg,
even
I
if it was.
invite, yeah, you're allowed to complain about that. You're allowed to vent and take up space and say that this was the worst day of your life or that you hated your birth experience. But I think it's such an old narrative that we're taught from a really young age, actually, for centuries, really, of that we can only practice gratitude in that regard, and that it's all or
Mhm.
nothing. That if you don't practice it, well, then again, it's the extreme of you must hate your baby if you don't practice that gratitude fully.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
so I'm proud of you for unfriending that person and recognizing that because by doing that, Meg, you knew that you had worth in what you were sharing and what you were saying.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
so sometimes that does mean deleting people from our life that just don't get where we're at.
Absolutely. All I could think, I just remember the moment, and even now coming back to me thinking, wow, if that person is willing to be like that in this moment, I can only imagine if I post something about a diaper blowout,
Mhm.
or uh, sleepless nights, or
Mhm.
both of my children had epic reflux. And again, of course, yes, I'm grateful to have babies to be able to spit up on me. And also sometimes it's funny to be able to post those things. And that's all I could think was like, wow, this person can't be supportive now. I can only imagine where it goes from here. And being able to set those boundaries and maintain them are very,
Yeah.
I found them to be very meaningful and healthy for me, for sure. Um,
Good.
but yeah, I'm glad. And you mentioned the toxic positivity of it all, of like, everything has to be sunshine and rainbows. Everything has to be delight, gratitude, the virtue signaling of it all. Of,
Mhm.
oh, I'm so grateful to be woken up at 3 o'clock in the morning. Like, no, you're allowed. That's literally my very first podcast episode ever, is you're allowed to be upset that your baby woke you up at 3 o'clock in the morning. That's
Yeah.
okay. Like, maybe don't
Yeah.
cuss at the baby, but it's okay to be tired. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's something that I see so much in my therapy space too, is having to introduce what's called dichotomy. I know you know that, Meg, being a therapist is like teaching people that you can hold two opposing feelings at once and that both things can be true. You can both love your baby with all of your heart and hate your birth experience. And the day, that all transpired, you can hold both of those things. You don't have to choose. But I think so often society teaches us that all or nothing, black and white thinking, and those extremes.
Yeah.
And it's dangerous. It really is, because it keeps us in that pit of isolation that we were speaking to at the beginning there.
It does. That's absolutely very true, because those thoughts will naturally occur. And then you feel this external pressure to not speak to them. And so then it all just ping pong balls around in your own head, and it becomes very toxic,
Yeah.
stagnant. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, just here
Mhm.
to validate that for everybody as well, right?
Yes.
Yeah. How do we even recognize when we've experienced a birth trauma? and, that we would benefit from working through it. I think sometimes people don't even really necessarily realize that. And what does that look like?
Yeah. I just want to normalize that too, that it's okay if you weren't able to kind of identify at the beginning that that's what you were experiencing, because we're in the thick of trauma at the beginning. And
Mhm.
so we're in that flee, or like fight, flight, freeze, fawn. There's so many F's now. I've heard of
Yeah.
like flooding. I've heard of funny being introduced now as another.
Really?
Yeah, actually, just in supervision yesterday with my supervisor, we were exploring this new version of funny, and
Yeah.
how often people's sense of humor comes up during that trauma response as a way to navigate, and that's also
Yes.
a spin off of fawn. And so I just want to normalize for folks that it's okay if initially you just didn't recognize that, or maybe you're still in the midst of recognizing it. But birth trauma is very subjective, and what we mean when we say that is that people get to define their experience and what it means to them. And
Mhm.
so there is no cookie cutter version of birth trauma. It looks so different on every single person that I see, and that's okay. And
Yeah.
so sometimes we think birth trauma is only if you almost died, and that's it. It
Right.
has to be this grand moment like on TV or in a movie. And it's like,
Uh-huh.
no, so often what women speak to and
Mhm.
birthers is just like that it is how they were made to feel within those
Yes.
moments that
Mhm.
made a greater impact. And so you're looking for trauma symptoms. If this is, something that you think that you're dealing with, then it's, nightmares and flashbacks and dissociation, anxiety, as well as that shame and guilt I was speaking to, struggles with bonding with your baby. I want to normalize that as well.
Mm.
And sex and intimacy issues. So these are all kind of the warning signs that what we may be experiencing is birth trauma. But again, like, you get to define that, but also so is your nervous system and your body defining that.
Yes.
We don't have a choice. This isn't a choice to be like, I have birth trauma.
Yeah.
Yeah, our system is going, you have birth trauma, right?
Yes.
Like, it's giving us all of those warning signs, those symptoms that I just spoke to.
Yes. Well, and I think too with that, the trauma Olympics is that what the expression I like to use of like, we don't need to participate in the trauma Olympics. You don't have to have won a bronze, silver, or gold medal. You don't have to compare yourself to other people. Your trauma is trauma, and it's important and meaningful to you. And that's the struggle that I have with a lot of people, is getting them over that hurdle. Sorry to continue the metaphor, track and field, but to say like, just because you know somebody who almost died or had emergency surgery or insert other traumas here, and you feel like that's air quotes worse, that doesn't mean that yours is not also very meaningful to you and impactful, and that your body is also letting you know that something is going on. So
Yeah.
it's all a very personalized thing, and also very normalized, and you deserve to take up that space as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, and I'm constantly dealing that in with that in my therapy room as well. And on my page, I'll have people message me and say, like, they often start off by saying, like, my I know my birth trauma isn't as bad as other people's.
Yes.
And
Yeah, people
I
feel like they
ask
have to
myself,
apologize right
yeah,
then
and
and there.
it's like, hold on here. Like, and it's always the first thing I address with those messages, or
Mhm.
with that person sitting across from me, is like, hold on, your story matters as much as anybody else's. Like
Mhm.
this, like you were saying, this isn't a competition.
Mhm.
There is no hierarchy of pain within birth trauma. Like, we're
Yeah.
all suffering here. We're all struggling in this together.
Absolutely. Yes. Um, yeah, that I find people apologizing to me as though they feel they're wasting my time. And I shouldn't laugh, but it does make me think of that too, the laughing. This is a tangent, but I'm bringing back. I think of laughter in the face of adversity, in the face of trauma, in the face of uncomfortability, is like the Chandler being in Friends character. Like I'm not good with the advice, may interest you in a sarcastic comment, some cheese. Like there's an episode where like somebody comes in and is like, hey, Chandler, tell a funny joke. And also side note, if anybody has not seen yet the Matthew Perry special on his addiction and recovery, please run and see that Diane Sawyer
I
interview.
haven't. No, I haven't watched it yet.
He has been working in recovery for a very long time, and helping other people. This is way off topic, but he has been working in it for a very long time and already helped a number of people. But this will really help people too. Again, talking about normalizing, like the guy from Friends has an addiction problem. Like let's normalize that as well. It's all about normalizing mental health. But But yeah, bringing that, the point of me saying that was talking about like laughing in those spaces, and not feeling uncomfortable. And I do kind of, I chuckle when people say that they apologize, like as though they're wasting my time because they're not worthy of somebody's assistance because it's not that bad. And it's like, but it's bad enough that you felt like you needed to talk to somebody. So
Yeah.
here we are.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
Yes. So again, apologies for the Matthew Perry tangent, but it did make me think of Chandler Bing, and I also want people to watch that. So, well, speaking of kind of the Hollywood of it all, I know that you've posted about it. I actually did a podcast episode about it, and I was thinking about it this morning, and I thought, I was going to actually do a reel on it, and then I was like, Teela's coming on my show today. I'm going to talk about it with her. So I was listening to the Scrubs Rewatch podcast because I love Scrubs, Fake Doctors, Real Friends, and I'm just giving everybody all kinds of content to consume today, aren't I? And they were talking about House of the Dragon, the House of Dragon, I don't know, the new Game of Thrones, and massive trigger warning, spoiler alert. If anybody wants to pop over, we're not going to go into all the details. So if the trigger warning is not that much, we will talk about it a little bit. If you don't want to hear what happens in the first episode, definitely jump through. But I was listening to Zach Braff, and he was saying, he's like, man, did they give some sort of like trigger warning or something? And Janelle Monique is their producer, and she was like, no, they didn't at all. And for me, I thought it would have been so nice for them to do like a choose your own adventure. Like if you've never had a birth trauma or find yourself feeling just generally not interested in watching a traumatic birth scene, skip ahead to this time and read this quick excerpt of what generally happens. And if you're feeling up for a gory scene, plug on through. But I thought how interesting it was for me. I was jealous, honestly, that Zach Braff was even able to say how disturbing he felt it was, and also to be able to watch it. And for me, having my own birth experience, which was, I will say, nothing like that, and also there, but for the grace of modern technological medicine and me not being born in the 1800s, I literally, my husband introduced me to Game of Thrones, I think right before the start of the second season. So we watched the whole first season together, and then we plugged in, and that's what we were really looking forward to. I can't watch it. I literally cannot. That scene stayed with me for weeks, intrusive thoughts. And I can't even watch the next episode. I hear there are more birth scenes later. I don't know the answer to that. That is not a spoiler. I don't know. But I wanted to be, sorry for my long intro, but I just really wanted to be able to talk to you about that, because for me, I am so jealous of the people who are able to just be like, yeah, that's good TV. What else is going on? Like, I can't do it. And I was curious kind of what your experiences have been or conversations that you've had around that.
Yeah, this is such a loaded conversation. It's one, honestly, Meg, I could spend a whole week with you talking about.
I think so, yes.
Yeah, it's like, it goes back to my work as a sexual assault therapist, and how it's been almost 2 decades of me not being able to watch scenes like that, where it's like violence like that inflicted on women.
Yes.
It's glamorized in entertainment for folks, and I just, like, I can't get behind it. And I am that person who walks out of a space, even in a movie theater, if I have to be like, I'm not going to sit here and be entertained by this moment. And so what happened actually when we watched it, I think I'll never forget, if I'm being honest. My husband and I were sitting watching this, and us two, we were so excited for this.
So excited.
We were dying for this television series to start. We had loved Game of Thrones. We were ready. And so the episode was pretty good. And then it got to that scene, to the birth trauma scene. And I just remember the physical reaction that I was having as I was watching it. And as an excessive postpartum hemorrhage survivor, it almost lost my life. I had blood transfusions, the whole 9 yards. I just remember, like, just my whole body kind of reacting in that moment, and I could feel my nervous system being activated. And I remember looking over at my partner, who was sitting like a couple of feet away on the recliner, and I will never forget this moment, because I looked over and he had his eyes closed. And this is a man, okay, who watches the show. So we're plugging all kinds of shows today.
We are. Content.
Watch all of these things except for this episode. The Boys. So are you familiar with the show? Boys. Okay,
Yes.
so violent, gory, funny, all like just out of this world kind of TV.
Yes.
So this is a man who watches that show and doesn't flinch, doesn't think twice, doesn't, just it's fine to him. So this is not a person who, and I feel like I need to preface that because it's like this isn't a person who gets like ew about gore or anything like this. He enjoys it. But as I
Mm,
sat there and I looked over at him with his eyes closed, it really hit me that day just how much our birth trauma has impacted him.
mhm,
Because yes, I was the one hemorrhaging, but he was the one watching it. He
mhm.
was the one standing there while I laid there watching all of that blood and worrying about the fact that he might lose his wife in that moment. And so like I'll never forget that moment of looking over and saying to him like, are you okay? And he's like, I'm no, I'm not.
Yeah.
And it's just like, and just bringing to mind the fact that like partners are absolutely impacted by birth trauma as well. And we don't talk about that enough. We don't talk about birth trauma, never mind, the impact that partners have that are witnessing these moments that are
Yes.
vividly emblazoned in their minds,
Mhm.
in a very different way from ours, actually.
Yes, and, if I could also we are just all over the content today. I had to stop watching The Boys. This is I probably should go back and keep watching it, but there was a scene where one of the women was trying to breastfeed a pump, and she was not able to, and I'm very lucky that's not a problem for me, but for some reason, I was so emotionally attached to that scene, I started crying, because there are so many people who can't produce milk. And I was like, well, this has just ruined that show for me because that's all I can think about now. And this was obviously years ago. We still lived in Houston at the time. But just it's funny how the smallest little things about birth and parenting and the body, the postpartum body and everything can be so triggering.
Yeah.
And I have to imagine somebody on the boys staff knew what they were doing when they wrote that, because I think the line that she said something was like, this baby will have my breast milk if it's the last thing I do, or something like that. And so I
Mm.
know somebody somewhere was able to recognize that humans have struggles with that and it's important. And I don't want to say that we can't talk to anybody about anything. Oh, somebody just rang my doorbell. My dog's gonna bark. You're okay. Sorry about that. I do think I don't want the pendulum to swing so far that we can't talk about anything ever, but I thought this scene was really interesting. I did read some articles. I don't know how true it is, but in following the overtone of Roe v. Wade in the United States, initially it was supposed to kind of be glossed over, that she was supposed to just have, again, spoiler alert, if you don't want to hear what
Yeah.
happens in the first episode, click ahead 30, that she was supposed to die in childbirth, that the baby was supposed to pass as well. And there wasn't like really a scene by it, just kind of mentioned in the funeral and whatever. And then I guess apparently the producers and the writers got together and they were like, no, we need to show people what forced birth looks like. And I don't know what the goal of it was. I don't know the energy behind it. I do wish somebody would have just put out a notice of
Yeah.
like, if it's going to be a problem for you, here's a
Please
brief
don't watch. Yeah.
synopsis. Please don't watch that, because
Uh,
um
honestly,
it was
Meg,
gratuitous.
I don't think that's true. I really don't. I think that that was like clickbait, like in terms of that somebody decided to run with that idea and that concept and say that that's why they did it. If that was intentionally the case, like first of all, if we kind of Google even like when or like the House of the Dragon was filmed, it was filmed before that decision was made.
Right.
And so also like if that was really intentional for them, I feel like they would have spoken to that in some way, like
I
at
That's
least at
what
the
yes.
end, yeah, saying like this, this episode was to bring to light blah blah blah,
Mhm.
this decision that was made.
Yeah.
But I don't know, I think it's dangerous to say that because like I just think it was for sensationalism, and that regardless if it was for that or not, it needed to come with a trigger warning. And oh,
Sorry.
he
Goodness
agrees, the
gracious.
dog agrees with me. Um,
Hey,
but
everybody.
yeah, and so like right after that took place, the moment with my husband, I immediately got online and warned my followers and said, listen, if you, spoiler alert, if you don't want to know what happened, skip my next story. And then I
Yeah.
And I'm not joking, Meg, when I said that I was flooded with hundreds of messages
Mhm.
of people either saying how deeply impacted they were watching that episode, or just thanking me for giving them a heads up, saying like, oh, like
Mhm.
I'm an emergency cesarean section survivor, a hemorrhage, or like I lost my baby, and like thank you for
Yes.
warning me about this. So it's just takes 2 seconds, 2 seconds to put a trigger warning. And
Mhm.
I'm not saying like, I don't think either one of us are saying this content shouldn't exist. We're saying
Mhm.
just give people a heads up.
Yes. Yes. That is exactly right. I genuinely wish that I could have known what happened, that she passed and the baby passed, and that is upsetting, and been able to move forward with that knowledge, because really, I don't know, I suppose the relationship between the daughter and the father was impacted by the choice. But still, anyway, speaking, a nice little choose your own adventure of some sort would have been nice. So I appreciate you sharing that, because I agree. I'm not in the business of censorship. I also am in the business of making sure that people feel respected and empowered, and not, and no one's forced to watch an HBO show, but like not subjected to something that they don't know is coming. I think it's very helpful for us. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Uh-huh. Um, so yeah, I was actually really interested in one of your posts. I have a number of your posts that I might, if we get around to it, but how mom brain might be birth trauma brain, because I hear so many people talking about mom brain, or they're even kind of like belittling themselves or disparaging in some way. And I like to inform people about kind of the neuroscience behind everything that's gone on with your body, and versus just, oh, I'm dumb now. And
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Oh, mom brain. And I think it's also legitimate too, like in terms of how our brain changes after, like during that
Yes.
postpartum period. And
Mhm.
then you add on that layer of birth trauma and the impact on the brain there. And it's like,
Mhm.
yeah, you're going to forget things constantly. You're not always going to make sense. You're going to find communication difficult and problem solving. And like, because those parts of the brains just took like a really big hit.
Yes.
And so, yeah, I think in those moments, I'm finding that the more and more like real psychology that I put into my posts, sometimes I get nervous about doing that because it's like you want to make it digestible for the people listening or like reading it. But I think it's so empowering, like to actually have the science behind why you have these trauma symptoms.
Mhm.
It's empowering, and it's giving people the language and the ability to understand themselves in a different way, and to detach from that self blame that they're constantly turning over in their head. It's like, oh, this isn't actually me. This is my trauma brain that is,
Yes.
creating these situations or handling specific moments in this way.
Absolutely. It's just, it goes back all to that self-judgment, self-blame, the trauma Olympics. I'm not worthy of somebody's time. It's not that big of a deal. It all really brings back to that. I think it's so helpful when people can see it, feel normalized, and to be able to understand you haven't done anything wrong. It really genuinely is something that's going on. And it's not to say that you'll never have a sharp memory again, just recognizing where you are, and working on the way that you're dealing with things as they come, for sure. And then the other one I wanted to talk about for sure was the 9 things parents want you to know about birth trauma and prematurity, and like NICU visits and all of that. What was kind of your inspiration and motivation behind gathering all that information for one of your posts?
I work really closely with a lot of NICU moms.
Mhm.
And so I feel very connected to that community. I do with all birth trauma survivors, but I would say like a large portion of my client load is that. And so it's just that community is something else, truly. And I'm not a part of it. I'm not a NICU mama.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
my daughter Livy, the closest I came to that was she had jaundice, and so she spent 24 hours under light therapy in an incubator, and that was hell. That was absolute hell for me
Oh,
to not
sure.
be able to touch my child, to hold her, to console her while she was crying. So that was my tiny taste of being a NICU mom. And but I just think I just have so much admiration for that community, because
Mhm.
their life is turned upside down. And whether it was for a few hours or a few days, or for a lot of people, it's a few months. and trying to, like, I just can't imagine what, like, waiting, 9 months to be with your little, or under 9 months if it's premature, and then having that moment come and not be able to parent and
Hmm.
be taught how to parent. And
Right.
so I just, like, I worry about the parents so much after birth trauma when it comes to NICU babies and premature babies, because they're forgotten. It goes back to those statements of, at least the baby's healthy now. Oh, you're both home now. Everything's
Hmm.
okay. But the baby's fine. Like, what's there to
Hmm.
worry about? All of those things. And it's like, yeah, but the parents' trauma often waits until they're home, because it's when they
Hmm.
wait in their own home that those trauma symptoms will often appear. And then where's the support? Where's the help then? So I like to be a voice for those parents and say, we cannot forget them. We can't.
Yes.
Um, they need to be at the forefront of our thought systems and our organizations and all of those things, because they are the ones parenting that baby that everyone's so worried about. Like, I don't worry about the babies often. I don't, because I know a whole team is behind.
Someone's doing that.
Yeah, but what about the parents?
Yeah, absolutely. And I loved in one of your slides was talking about, and because language is just so important. It's so important where, again, I'm not in the business of censorship, and I'm also in the business of education and making sure that people are expressing themselves in healthy ways and understanding what they say has meaning and power behind it. And so one of the things even was just saying, like, to stop telling NICU parents, "Oh, are you going to go visit your baby?" And it's like, it's not the same as, it's not a visitation. It's not often just sweet little cuddles, though that certainly can be part of it, but it's life altering decisions and choices and seeing your baby struggle and all the things that go on along with that. And making sure that we're being intentional about the way that we support people is very helpful.
Yeah, I pick on language a lot on my page, and that goes back to being a narrative therapist and just the
Mhm.
power of language and the way in which it's delivered. You can wreck a person with that, or you can build them up. And so, yeah, we really have to watch the way we say things to people as they're grieving and trying to heal from trauma.
Yes, absolutely. I think it's very helpful. And the idea of going back and forth, I'm very lucky as well. My children, neither one were in the NICU. The idea of going back and forth from the NICU and taking the fear and the anxiety and the worry with you, um and then feeling the anxiety while you're there as well, and everything that goes along with that. So I thought it was really helpful, for people to be able to see those things. That was from, what is today? I think it was from November 2nd. So if anybody wants to go see the T on birth trauma, that was from November 2nd, that post that I'm referencing here. So for sure. Um, yeah. So I wanted to discuss reclaiming your story after birth trauma. What made you, how did you come to decide on the workshop? What was this process like creating it? How did that go?
Yeah, this is a perfect segue to what we were just talking about, because
Yeah.
um, one of the modalities that I practice, so I do EMDR, that's a big one. I'm a clinician trained in that, and I've done like advanced training in EMDR. But at the very heart of who I am as a therapist is narrative. And so narrative's motto is like, the the problem is the problem, the person is not the problem. So it really helps to destigmatize mental health, to help that individual to externalize and see the problem as something that's outside of them. Because when we do that, there's more likelihood of us being able to gain control over it and kind of reclaim our lives. So I use that language of reclaiming actually a lot. And
Mhm.
so when I thought about doing the workshop for the reclaiming your story after birth trauma, I wanted like story. I often don't call myself a therapist, but instead I say, like, I'm a story keeper, because
Oh, I love that.
that's really what we're doing, right? In those spaces, is that we are listening and witnessing and honoring people's story. And the way in which they are telling that story to themselves deeply impacts their healing from trauma. And
Mhm.
so much of how it gets colored is that they failed. That's like usually the biggest narrative that comes out of birth trauma is self-failure. And so if we can rewrite it and reclaim it and make that story different, even though it's already taken place. And it's not, at the beginning of my workshop, I really preface that, going back to toxic positivity, it's not about like thinking like, oh, this was meant to be, and this is just our story, and those
Oh,
things.
yeah.
No, 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 no. We're going to toss that out the window. What this really is reclaiming yourself within that
Mhm.
story and how you view, yeah, your role in it and how that all unfolded. So I just wanted to give people the tools to see themselves in a different light. So that was like the big inspiration behind it, was my love of narrative therapy and just knowing that story is really what's at the root of all this.
Amazing. Yes. I think that's such a beautiful thing too, the narrative therapy piece and allowing people the again, that space to take like I'm taking up this space. I'm sharing my story. My story is important and valid and
Mhm.
deserves to be heard. Again, not that it's so interesting though. I want to be clear about my language, not that telling people that they're allowed to, but I think people do come in, as we talked about, timid and apologetic to take up space. And so it's helpful in this times to be able to do that for people. Absolutely.
Yeah. Because
Yeah.
they don't think they're capable of it or that they should, or yeah, or they feel ashamed to.
Yes.
So yeah,
Hmm.
so rewriting is so that workshop was incredible. I don't think I'll ever forget that experience. Um,
Yes.
yeah, it was really beautiful. Mhm.
Amazing. Amazing. So obviously everyone's story is so different, but have you noticed anything kind of any common threads or themes in working with the perinatal population that you feel you've recognized kind of over time?
Yeah, I think the more and more work I do in the birth trauma world, I'm really recognizing that it's grief and loss.
Hmm.
That's actually what I'm dealing with here, is that and the loss, it's like an endless list. It's this cascade of reasons that people are grieving when it comes to that birth experience. And
Hmm.
so I think that the more I connect with grief and loss in that space and give them the opportunity to really speak to that, I'm finding it really, really powerful for people.
Mm.
Um, so that's one of the biggest common threads I've noticed is
Yeah.
the grief. Yeah.
One of the things that I've seen and talked to people about is like, when you have a traumatic birth situation, kind of even the birth photos is one that people feel are they feel like it's I don't like to use the word, but it's like, oh, it's so silly of me to be concerned. It's just a photo. And it's like, but everybody else has this memory encapsulated of this moment that for a lot of people was not a traumatic moment. And for you to, it can be something like that. It doesn't have to be a physical trauma. Things that were important to you that didn't go the way that you had envisioned or hoped, the loss of that dream, that vision. It's if it's significant to you, then it's important, and being able to talk about that and speak through it can be healing and helpful as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, just a week or two ago, I made a post about that saying, like, birth trauma robbed me of so many photos I'll never get again. Like, I'm a one and done mama. It's really dangerous for me to try and have another baby. Like, I don't know if I would make it this time around.
Mhm.
And so there are so many moments that I grieve around that. Like, there are so many photos and videos that I'll never get to recreate. Like when, like, yeah, and that's really sad. And so in that post, I was, yeah, normalizing that these are not small things.
Mm.
And they feel silly, right? We feel silly or stupid or ridiculous for complaining about them. To go back to that statement you made before about like complain, it's like,
Mhm.
no, you get to take up space about that.
Mhm.
These are moments we're taught from a really young age to go after and acquire and achieve.
Yes.
Yeah, and then when they don't happen, it's that also, that societal influence and pressure and expectation also adds another layer to our experience, because we were
Yes.
told these were the photos
Mhm.
you have to get and treasure.
Yes, absolutely. I remembered seeing that post and just thinking, yes, this is another just I'm sorry, I'm not gonna be too much of a cheerleader for you, but I just really love all the things
Take
that
your
you come up with
time.
to the things that you come up with to share, because it's so validating for people who do feel like they don't have the space to take up, and it's great to see that. So I really do appreciate that. And so where can everybody find you?
Yeah, so they can find me. I also wanted to, if it's okay, I wanted to share just a little bit, because I released information about it today too,
Oh,
about
please.
yeah, about the wellness retreat that I'm doing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's called the Balance After Birth Trauma Wellness Retreat. And so it's very much like a passion project for me. I'm not getting paid from this. I'm doing it solely volunteer, and I have been for months now. And so it's taking place May 12th to 14th of next year, 2023, in Canmore, Alberta, which is just gorgeous. Like, it's absolutely a stunning location, and no matter where your location is in the world, you can go. And so there's actually only 11 spots left, and registration is January 15th, 2023.
Okay.
And I'm really proud because I've been busting my ass. Can I say ass on
Oh
here?
yeah, this is a safe space. Bring it on.
Okay, good. Thank you. I've been busting my ass with getting sponsors and donations to try and lower the cost. And so the initial cost was going to be $1,500, and I've got it down to $950 for each. Yeah,
Wow.
so I'm super excited. And I also found sponsors to sponsor 2 birth trauma survivors for free. So that
Beautiful.
giveaway just took place last month, which was just like all kinds of emotions when that happened.
Huge.
But to anybody listening who wants that sense of community and connection, that's purely why I'm doing this,
Mhm.
is to just give people a space to gather and to take care of themselves and learn new tools and techniques on how to do that. So just wanted
Amazing.
to share that info with folks. Yeah.
Wow. And I bet Canada in May must be really lovely.
It's not, well, it's still a little chilly.
Still a little chilly.
So bring your
Yeah. I went to a wedding there in July, and that was beautiful weather in Muskoka, Ontario. So
Ooh,
yeah,
yes, yeah. Our summers in Canada are pretty incredible, especially actually in the prairies. They're something else. But
yeah,
yeah, people can find me first and foremost on my Instagram. So that's the tea. So think of the tea that you drink, the tea on birth trauma, and as well as www.theteaonbirthtrauma.com. So I have my website. You can also find me on Psychology Today, which is a really great resource for people just to look into to find out what therapists are in your area. So those are, I'd say, like the 3 main sources of place that they can find me.
amazing. Amazing. Well, and I'll have all of that in the show notes. I thank you so much for the time here today. The more that we can say this over and over again in many different ways, I think it really starts to sink in for people that we're allowed to feel how we feel, and we're allowed to take up that space. And I always end my show with a quote from Ted Lasso: "Be curious, not judgmental." And it really applies. Are you a Ted
I
Lasso?
love him. We are really plugging shows today.
Yes, we are. I do. Literally, that's how I close every episode. But I am about all the content today. So if you ever wanted something to take up some time, here are all these shows. But I think it really applies here today about if you're recognizing something going on in your body or an emotional trigger or something happening, to be curious about it. What is my body trying to tell me? What is this thought? What are these feelings trying to tell me? Instead of being judgmental, I shouldn't feel this way. I should feel grateful. I should, not judging, just out of curiosity. Where can I go from here? So to everybody again, be curious, not judgmental. Goodbye.